So, as we move into the second week of May here in lovely 2020, we are 2 months deep into a series of stay at home orders around the country. We're also definitely several weeks into a national discussion about when is the appropriate time to begin either easing off on the stay at home orders or ending them altogether. And while there are certainly a lot of different discussion points, it seems pretty clear that primarily people are thinking about what is the effect of the stay at home orders on the economy. So, right there, we had a phrase that we've used before in class, but we've never really sat and studied what it means. And it's a phrase that is used all the time. If you take a look at the right side of the screen here, you see a series of four headlines kind of randomly pulled from a Google search. The top headline from the New York Times reads, "Repeat after me, the markets are not the economy." So, right there, that headline should tell you that there is an idea over what this thing called the economy is. The third headline from CNN discusses the strong economy didn't make Trump. Once again, there's clearly an idea in the author's perspective that there is such a thing called the economy. The final headline, with the great picture of the kid with his nose against the chalkboard, talks about the economy may be in for what they're calling a square root shaped recovery. Regardless of what any of these stories are about, there's clearly an idea that there is such a thing called the economy. So, this is one of the things we're going to be studying over these last 2 weeks of what is this idea called the economy. We're going to be looking at a series of data to make judgments about whether the US economy is good or bad. And those are incredibly simplistic terms, but one of the things we're going to look at is data to make sure that these are not a matter of opinion. We're going to look at data to be able to compare that data to other criteria so we can make some judgments about where the economy is, where it's come from, where it might be going. And these are the same kinds of data that policymakers used to try to influence this thing called the economy. So, one of the things that we're going to do with that data, or you're going to be doing, is comparing where the economy is today compared to where it was 2 months ago, to 2 years ago, to 2 decades ago. And we're also going to do a little bit of comparison between the United States economy with other countries' economies. So, we keep using this phrase, the economy, again and again and again. So, let's talk about what exactly it is. When people use the phrase the economy, really what they're talking about is what's called macroeconomics. Next year, when you guys go off to college, hopefully you get to have some face to face classes. Hopefully things are going well. Most likely, you're not going to have a class simply called economics. Most likely, you're going to have one of two options for an introductory level economics course, either in macroeconomics or in microeconomics. What we've spent most of our time on this year, in fact, has been microeconomic in nature. And thinking about the terminology of microeconomics, the prefix micro means small. So when we study microeconomics, we're focused on the behavior of individual people or what's going on in individual markets. So we've asked you to consider the individual decision making of a high school student in deciding whether or not to stay up an extra hour in order to continue binging Ozark on Netflix versus using that time to review notes and study for an exam for physics tomorrow. We've looked at individual markets and tried to understand what the impact is going to be on the price of eggs if there's a sale on bacon or if the cost of chicken feed rises. Again, that's a microeconomic question. Even the work that we've done on Inside the Meltdown, the 2008 financial crisis, we have primarily approached that as a microeconomic issue, even though it's certainly much larger than the cost of eggs or the price of eggs. So as we looked at Inside the Meltdown, we primarily focused on the market for mortgages. Why would individuals take out certain mortgages? Why would banks offer to sell certain mortgages? Why would they rebundle and repackage those mortgages? And certainly that has had a broader economic impact, and we'll actually deal with that more in this unit. But really, the Inside the Meltdown work we did was very focused on those particular markets. Macroeconomics, by contrast, doesn't look primarily at one market versus another. It's trying to look at what we call aggregate behavior. and aggregate means to add it all together. So when we talk about what's going on with overall prices, and you see what appears to be a normal supply and demand graph, but it's not just supply and demand, it's aggregate supply and aggregate demand. In other words, what is the public's demand for all goods and services, not just eggs or soda or hot dog buns? And what is the aggregate supply for all products, not just toilet paper, not just mortgages, and not just eggs? It's trying to add everything together in order to have a sense of what's going on with price levels overall and to have a sense of how much we're producing. So macroeconomics is really trying to look at things from a national perspective. So this question now of, well, what makes an economy good? With each of these judgments, we're going to have a statistic that we're going to be using to measure what's going on in the national economy. So if it helps to think about the United States as a person. If the United States was a person, the United States as a person would want to have increasing income, just like you as an individual, for you to have a good personal economy, probably would prefer to have increasing income. So we're going to start looking at what makes an economy good by hoping that there is an increase in national income. And the statistic that we're going to use to measure this, we're going to spend a couple of days this week getting more in depth with it, is called gross domestic product. And what gross domestic product is, it's the total value of all of the goods and services that a country produces in a given time period, typically in a given year. So for a country's economy to be good, typically they need to have increasing levels of income. If a country has decreasing levels of income, just like it would on a personal level, we would make some judgment that that economy is not very good or is bad. The second thing we're going to look at to judge kind of the overall health of an economy is the question of jobs and labor. Typically, for an economy to be doing well, there has to be a match between the jobs that are available and the labor that would like to have a job. So really what we're talking about here is unemployment. From the perspective of somebody who wants a job, they would certainly not look at the economy as very good if there just aren't jobs available, especially if there aren't jobs available in their field of study given their skill level. On the flip side, businesses, they also need labor to be able to produce goods and services. So we're not only going to look at what is going on with income, but are there enough jobs available? And is there enough labor available for both laborers and employees to be able to produce the goods and services? The third thing that we would want in a good economy or in a healthy economy is that the people who hopefully have jobs and hopefully have increasing income, that income can actually afford the goods and services that they want to purchase. So what we're talking about here is inflation. And what you see there is a basic definition for inflation, which is an increase in the overall price level. So consider this potential problem. You might have a country whose income has increased by 3 or 4% in a given year, which sounds great. But if the overall price level increased by 10 or 12%, what that means is, on average, the individual person in this country is going to be able to afford fewer goods and services than they did the year before. So the three primary measurements that we use to judge the overall health of an economy are gross domestic product, unemployment, and inflation. So what we're going to be introducing here is what's called the classical model of economics. And again, anytime we're looking at a model, it's an idea. It's an idea about how something is supposed to work. We also know that models are not always perfect, and in fact, they're often very flawed. The classical model is based upon a belief that, or largely has a kind of self-correcting series of mechanisms built into this. This was largely the view of most economists of how national economics worked, but the Great Depression changed that. We're going to come back to this at the end of this lecture. So what you see on the screen before you is what is called the business cycle. And this is really a demonstration of what the classical model of economics is. So we're going to explain the different components of this graph, and they're going to appear some explanations down here. First of all, I want to make sure we understand the axes. On the vertical axes here, we see real output. In other words, production. Again, it's by production that income and wealth typically are created. So if you take a look at this dotted line, what you see here is that as we go across time, and this is true for most economies over a long period of time, is there's an upwards trend. In other words, countries over the long haul tend to be able to produce more than they have in the past. So there's an overall trend towards increasing output, and there's two fairly simple reasons for that. First, as countries grow in population, more people tend to be able to produce more than fewer people did. It's a pretty simple idea there. Along with that, over time, what we find is that people and companies and economies as a whole can be increasingly productive by investing in capital resources, whether that's technology or individual skills by having greater education. So there's a general trend line that output increases over time. But this green line is really what we want to focus on. And if you'll notice, the trend line follows along with the green line, but the green line does not follow along in a steady upwards trend. In fact, what we tend to find in economies are these fairly volatile or often volatile spikes and declines, increases, declines, increases, and declines. So we're going to work through what the classical model suggests is going on within the business cycle. So first of all, one part of this business cycle is what we refer to as an expansion or a growing of the national economy. And on this drawing, you see two different expansions. Well, here's what we expect to see happening during an expansion. So first of all, the basic idea of an expansion is that we're going to see an increase in gross domestic product. Businesses are going to be producing more goods and services. So we see that right here. As businesses produce more goods and services, in general, what that means is they're going to need more employees. And as businesses hire more people, what we tend to see is that we have a decrease in unemployment during an expansion. So as more people are employed, more people have jobs, more people are getting paychecks, what that also means is people have more dollars. And if people have enough dollars, they can begin to drive up the prices of the goods and services that they buy. So one of the ideas within the classical model is that if inflation, increase in price level, goes up too far, too fast, up towards the peak here, that's going to start to deter consumers from buying those goods and services. And so as people begin to purchase less, the expansion is going to slow down or stop altogether. And in fact, it can lead into what's referred to as a recession or to recede. Some people will interchange this with the word contraction. But what we see in a recession or a contraction is that GDP, which is a measurement of production, decreases. So bring it back to point 3 here. If consumers start purchasing fewer goods and services because the price has gone up, eventually businesses are going to stop producing as many goods and services. And if they produce fewer goods and services, that's going to lead towards them not needing as much labor as they did during the expansion. So what we're likely to see during a recession is that unemployment is going to increase. Ignore that second word there, that's a typo. We're going to see during a recession, GDP decreases and unemployment is going to increase as well. Now, at the bottom of this recession, this trough, the bottom part, what we tend to see are lower rates of inflation. In other words, prices stop going up so far so fast. People have fewer dollars, and so they stop, in a sense, bidding up prices. And if the prices slow down enough, then people and businesses are going to start buying products again. Or businesses are going to see that it's advantageous to them to start hiring more workers because wage growth has slowed down. So out of this trough, in theory, it should give an incentive for people to begin purchasing more goods and services. And that's where the cycle, in theory, starts all over again. People start purchasing more goods and services, and now we're back to another expansion. And as businesses produce more goods and services, unemployment decreases, and the cycle, in theory, starts all over again.